Hey guys, welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the mythology of Jupiter, and this is not just any old video, okay? This video is specifically for you if you're interested in learning astrology. And, you know, with learning astrology, like you would think that learn a lot of mythology as you're learning to be an astrologer, but you don't. You barely learn any, and it's like, well, you could apply any myth to any of the planets, but then I was thinking like why? Like the Greeks and Romans actually had like specific myths associated with the planets to help us understand these big spiritual concepts. So I'm bringing it back. Let's use this mythology as a fun way to learn astrology. Now, if you're here and you're not interested in learning astrology, no problema, no problema. Anyway, um, this I'm going to share some really good mythology with you. If you want to know the sources that I got this from, they're in the description below. There's some pretty good books that I read and, a lot of things that I learned I'm going to share with you today. If you don't know me, my name is Valentine Lister, and on this channel, I teach about astrology, tarot, and I do a weekly forecast every week that goes over the transits and just the energy for each day of the week and then gives you advice on like what to do with that. I also give birth chart readings, tarot card readings to you guys, and you can find more about that on valentinelister.com. So first of all, I'm definitely not going to go over like every myth of Jupiter because he's like in like most of the myths, because he was the supreme god. He was the head honcho. And so that's like actually an important thing to know is that he's related to the law and also having connections and friendship and people who can help you out, like connections with people where they can get you places where you want to be when it comes to your goals, dreams, and wishes. So basically, like when the gods were fighting over something, or if someone wanted a favor or wanted things to go their way, they would reach out to Jupiter and be like, "Hey, yo, help me out. Um, give me a deal, grant me a favor." And if Jupiter liked them, he would grant favors. He did grant lots of favors. So again, the law and having connections, and actually that makes a lot of sense if you know how like the law and justice works. It's not, how much you know, it's who you know type deal. Or even in business, it's like, it's not what you know, it's who you know. So like, how did Jupiter become the head honcho? Well, I'm going to talk actually more about it next week in the Saturn video when that comes out, about Jupiter overthrowing his dad. Basically, he overthrew his dad, Cronus or Saturn, and he did this by beguiling him into like loosening Saturn up. He was like, things are going to be okay, you can relax a little bit. So Jupiter relates to loosening boundaries, seeing beyond boundaries or darkness or places that you can't see beyond. So after Jupiter defeated his dad, it was not smooth sailing. He had to fight these earth monsters in order to be able to rule. One of the biggest ones and the scariest ones was the monster Typhon. He was described as a dragon, and he was super scary, super duper scary. And so Jupiter got his brothers and sisters together. They actually hid for a while, and then Jupiter was able to slay Typhon. So that myth talks about how Jupiter has the ability to overcome the earthly realm and to fight fears, to fight our fears, and to overcome them, despite how hard it is. So sometimes people think of Jupiter as a very happy-go-lucky sign. But the interesting thing is, it's not about being happy-go-lucky. It's about dealing with the really harsh realities of life and going, I see something more. I see beyond this. You're like tuned in with the universal truths or your spirit, and you're connected to your spirit guides and connected to your dreams and hopes. And you're like, there's the point where you're like, this really sucks, but there has to be something more. There has to be something beyond this. This can't just be it. And exploring that and seeing beyond that and really overcoming the earthly realm with faith and hope and love and meaning and wisdom. Finding wisdom in your experiences is a very Jupiter thing. Okay, so the next myth is with Prometheus, and we get to see Jupiter's dark side. So with Prometheus, so basically Jupiter was like, he was not feeling mortals because like they started, I think he created humans or they came out of the earth, or it's unclear because there's a few different myths about that. But he didn't like humans for a while because they started out okay, but then in what was called the Iron Age, they became really disgusting and were doing just nasty things to each other, very hedonistic, not worshiping the gods, not having respect for the gods or the earth. Um, they were like murdering people, like assaulting people in very perverse ways, and just like nasty things, like not being good to each other. So he's like, I have to take these humans out. I'm gonna just make them suffer. So the god Prometheus was like, I kind of like these humans. I like them the way they are. I'm gonna help them out. And so he stole fire from the gods to help out humans. And so Jupiter was super pissed and he's like, I am going to just like torture you because I am so, so mad. And so Jupiter like put Prometheus on this like rock, and a eagle came to eat his liver every day and torture him, and it was really painful, and then the liver would grow back. And Prometheus was like, whatever. Like, I think Jupiter was like, well, I'll give you a chance if you apologize and you stop helping these humans. And Prometheus was like, oh no, I'm going to keep helping them. I stand by what I did. I don't care how much you torture me. I'm going to be, I'm going to stick with my guns. And so he was being tortured for a while, and that really sucked. But later, I'll talk about that myth a little, like in the next few myths. But Jupiter fathered Hercules, who is like half man, half god. And later on, Hercules actually like finds out about his heritage and stuff, and he frees Prometheus because he feels bad for him. So Prometheus does get out of that torture. So it's funny that people think of Jupiter as very happy-go-lucky because there is an angry side to Jupiter. And it's interesting. So Jupiter rules both Sagittarius and Pisces, and I've definitely seen an angry side to both signs, and a self-righteousness for doing the right thing. And I've seen this with both, like just like when people have Jupiter signs, is like they can be really, really scary. All right, so continuing with the theme of Jupiter hating on humans, he was responsible for the whole Pandora's box situation, if you know that myth. And if you don't know, so basically, like basically, there were humans, things were going okay. Jupiter's kind of like, okay, fine, they have fire, they can live, fine. Um, and so he figured out a way to just like get back at the humans. And he gave this guy named Epimetheus a gift for his wedding, and he was marrying Pandora. Now, Prometheus, who had the back of, humans, he was like, Epimetheus, don't accept any gifts from Jupiter. But Epimetheus did. He gave it to his wife. So basically, Pandora opens this box, and all of the great evils of the world come into the world and cause suffering for humans. And the moral of this story, as is told in this myth, is that you can't escape the will of Zeus. You can't escape your fate or your destiny or what's meant for you. So this next myth talks about how Jupiter starts to have an appreciation for humanity because he falls in love with the maiden Io. And she really goes through the ringer. She gets tortured, which is in the Mercury video. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. And so she ends up wandering the earth, and she's like made insane by Hera. And Hera is Jupiter's wife, and she represents the earth and the physical realities. So basically, Io is out in the wilderness and is just battling her mind, battling survival. She's fallen in love with Jupiter. And a lot of times with these myths, that represents like a calling, like an inner calling towards faith or going towards something. And so a lot of times that does cause suffering because we're going against society and what they think we should do, to something more. And so, Jupiter is related to breaking away from the rules of society because you believe in something more, like there's something bigger that you want to pursue. So basically, eventually, Jupiter gives Io some rest and creates sanity within her and helps her to bear a son and helps her to bear a kingdom that she can go and rely on. And that's actually related to the myth of Taurus. I'll get to those eventually. They're all interconnected, these myths. So, in that story, it's like the love of God or the universe for humanity, that there is love, there is this benevolence towards us as humans that eventually ends up developing. And that by following that inner calling, following our faith, and being willing to go through whatever we need to go through in life, to follow that, even if it means breaking rules or traditions or going out into the wilderness or whatever that means, that at some point we'll be rewarded for that leap of faith. Okay, so Jupiter does have an appreciation for humanity, but he's also like, in one of the stories, he's like, let's just wipe out humanity and like restart. Like, that would be good. Like, humans can live, they'll be okay. But I want to just wipe out all of these nasty people, like from the Iron Age. It was called the Iron Age, where people were super vicious and mean and nasty, which I talked about. So he creates a great flood, which is very similar to Noah in the Ark. If you know that story, the story is like pretty similar. But it had to do with Prometheus's children, or actually like his son and then his wife. So it was Deucalion, who was the son of Prometheus, and Pyrrha, who was the wife of Deucalion. And basically, there's this great flood. Jupiter destroys the entire Earth. And Deucalion and Pyrrha, there's variations on this. So they're in a boat or they go into this chest and they survive the great flood. And after that, they're really struck by like these emotions of like, oh my God, everyone died. It's just us. They're mourning it. They're hit by like just the power of that, and just like also the burden of like, it's our responsibility to create life. Like, how are we going to do that? So they pray to the goddess Themis, who is related to justice. And so she comes down and she says, you have to throw the bones of the great mother behind you. And they're like, what does that mean? And then they figure out she means to throw stones behind them. So they go, okay, we're going to have faith that this is going to work out, that we got this message from the goddess, and we're going to do this. So they start throwing stones behind them, and humans start developing. And so they're able to recreate humanity by throwing the stones behind them. And so this myth, I thought, is about like leaving hardships behind in order to move forward, not getting stuck in the past, but moving forward, which is a very Jupiterian thing, and having hope and optimism in the future. So the next myth, there's a lot of them with Jupiter. I narrowed them down, but there's still a lot. There's Callisto and Jupiter. So Callisto was actually a virgin maiden of Artemis or Diana. And so they were expected to not get it on with guys. They had to be virgins to be in her cult. Artemis was like, big no if you get it on with somebody. So Jupiter disguised himself as Artemis, super shady. And Artemis was looking pretty sexy that day, and she's like, I never looked at you like this, Artemis. Like, you're looking pretty good. So she got it on with Artemis, but it was really Jupiter. So she became pregnant, and Artemis like noticed that after a while. Like, it was like they said like 9 moon cycles, so she was like full-term pregnancy. I don't know why they didn't notice sooner, but they go and take a bath and like they bathe in the nude, and Artemis notices that Callisto is pregnant, and she's like, ooh, that's a big no, I'm definitely kicking you out. And then Hera notices too, and she's like, I know you were with my husband, you whore, I'm gonna destroy you. And she grabs her hair and she throws her to the ground, and she turns her into a bear. And so Callisto is like roaming the forest, trying to protect and defend herself. So the symbolism of the bear is actually connected to protecting yourself when people are after you, and defending yourself and what you believe in is some of the symbolism of the bear. So that's what Callisto had to do. She had to defend herself and her choices, and she really didn't have anybody to have her back. So fast forward 15 years later, her son Arcus is hunting in the woods, and he sees Callisto, who's a bear, and he's totally gonna just hunt her and kill her. But luckily Jupiter finally intervenes, and he's like, yo, don't kill her, that's your mom. And so after that, he honors both Callisto and Arcus by putting them into the sky, into the stars. And so Callisto became Ursa Major, or the Great Bear, and Arcus became Ursa Minor, the Little Bear. And so again, this talks about like sometimes we can be pulled away from our path or our faith because we start believing something new, or we start looking at things in a different light. So these last two myths are pretty quick. Again, Jupiter disguises himself and lays with Alcmena, and she has Hercules, and Hercules is actually a twin, but her husband fathered the other twin, and Jupiter fathered Hercules. Hera was mad, of course, that Jupiter was laying with, some woman, so she sends snakes to kill Hercules, and Hercules is so strong, he destroys the snakes. He strangles them, even though he's an infant, which is pretty cool. And he has to fight jealous Hera throughout his life, and the things that she throws at him. And so Jupiter also creates life that's powerful and brave and is able to overcome the material realm. And so this goes into the next myth. And this is actually not just one myth, but throughout the myths, Jupiter actually fights a lot with Hera. They're married, and they really fight a lot. Like, he's cheating all the time, and Hera wants him to respect her and love her and be with her. And this is not just talking about a bad marriage. It actually talks about the tension between the material realm, the physical earth that we can feel with our five senses, which is related to Hera, and the things that we can't see, our spirit, our soul, faith, our feelings, being connected to the spirit realm, because Jupiter was a sky god. He was related to the sky and lightning and thunder, and the eternal and spiritual. So it is in these myths talking about the battle between like being up in our heads and things we believe, and the actual physical reality of implementing them, and how problematic that can be. All right, and the last thing I thought was cool, this is not a myth, but this is just looking into the history, that Jupiter was associated, another form, he was related to the god Janus. And so that was an Italian god from the Italian tribes. And he ruled crossing places and bridges. And so he was the god of beginnings and connections. And so, that relates, Jupiter is always hooking people up and connections. But basically, Jupiter is connected with opening doors and even making connections. So any Jupiter ruled people of strong like Jupiter placements can make these amazing connections where like all of a sudden life falls into place, and you're like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. And it makes so much sense how things are connected and why we're here and the meaning of life. Okay, guys, that's all I have for you for the myths of Jupiter. Hope you enjoyed this. And this is just a reminder to like, subscribe, hit the bell to be notified for the next video. Also, share this out. If you think people should know these myths and the connections to the meanings of Jupiter, share it with somebody. All right, I love you guys, and I'll see you in the next video. If you like this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell to be notified for whenever I release a new video every single week.